Hollywood has always been a place where most people believed dreams come true. In reality, nightmares run concurrently to the hopes of people that want to get their big break. We have learned that Hollywood is a place of make-believe where those that make money garner more protection than those of lesser importance. On this episode of True Crime Man's Dark Imagination, we'll cover 4 stories that have to do with unsolved or mysterious murders that occurred during Hollywood's golden age. On an unusually cold night in Los Angeles, California in February 1922, even though Prohibition had been in full force and effect for the last 3 years, famed Hollywood director William Desmond Taylor and movie star Mabel Normand shared orange blossom gin cocktails early in the evening and enjoyed some small talk. The two often shared each other's company when they discussed the events of the day, Nietzsche, Freud, and the business in which they shared, motion pictures. At approximately 7:45 p.m., Taylor walked Normand to her car where the chauffeur waited dutifully. As the car drove off, Normand blew kisses to Taylor, and he responded in kind. Taylor walked back to his bungalow located on Alvarado Street, opened the door, and walked inside. This was the last time that Normand, or anyone else for that matter, saw Taylor alive. At approximately 8 p.m. on that evening, neighbors reported that they heard what sounded like a car backfire. Faith McLean, one of the residents in Taylor's building, walked over to her window and thought she saw a man with a long coat wearing a muffler or with his collar turned up and a plaid cap covering his face. The man then turned and looked back at McLean, returning to Taylor's residence as if he had forgotten something. 10 years later, the woman claimed she could not positively identify the man. Another neighbor, Hazel Gillen, stated that she saw the man walking from the complex after she heard the car backfire. At approximately 7:30 a.m. the next morning, Taylor's house servant, Henry Peavy, arrived at his employer's bungalow. When Peavy walked through the door, he called to Taylor and received no answer. When he walked further into the apartment, he found Taylor lying dead in the living room. Peavy yelled really loudly and then ran into the courtyard of the bungalow. The first entity that Peavy called was the studio that Taylor worked for rather than the police. When the investigators finally arrived, 12 hours after Peavy's discovery of the body, they thought that Taylor may have died from natural causes until they turned the body over and discovered Taylor lying in a pool of blood. The death of Taylor created even more of a scandal than what Hollywood needed at the time. The year before, comedian Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle stood accused of the rape and murder of a young Hollywood starlet with the reputation of being a very amenable party girl. Therefore, after the discovery of Taylor's body, studio executives wanted any unsavory revelations to remain at a minimum. In fact, when the police finally arrived, they noticed that there were studio executives at Taylor's bungalow burning papers in the fireplace. When police questioned the various witnesses, investigators held a great deal of interest in Mabel Normand. Normand stated that she visited Taylor just briefly to have a drink and then to borrow 2 books from the victim. Normand made it clear that Taylor expressed worry regarding his former secretary, Edward Sands, who disappeared after forging checks in the director's name, and whom Taylor had to bail out of jail after he solicited young boys in a local park. Additionally, once the news hit the papers, rumors began to fly regarding sex parties and open drug use. As far as the police were concerned, the murder appeared to be a love triangle gone wrong, with Mabel Normand and a young starlet named Mary Miles Minter to be in the center of the controversy. In cases such as this, vicious gossip is accepted as fact. With that in mind, more innuendo intimated that Normand and Taylor belonged to an occult group known as the Ordo Templis Orientis. This cult was led by the renowned Satanist Aleister Crowley. Additionally, Rumors also spread that Taylor frequented an opium den where men would smoke the Eastern drug and had sexual relations with each other. Some hypothesized that Taylor's death was the result of a homosexual revenge killing. One of the most interesting facets of the case emerged just 2 days after the discovery of Taylor's body. William Desmond Taylor was not really William Desmond Taylor. His real name was William Cunningham Dean Tanner. Details revealed that Tanner was once a traveling actor, gold prospector, and antique dealer in the early 1900s. Tanner married a woman named Ethel May Harrison, and they had a daughter. In 1908, Tanner abandoned his family, and his wife never heard from him until 1919, when she viewed a movie where the actor she recognized as her husband was billed under the name of William Desmond Taylor. When assessing the investigation, authorities realized there were a great deal of suspects that had access to the victim at the time of the murder. One of the strongest suspects, a Charlotte Shelby, was the mother of Mary Miles Minter and became incensed with Taylor when she learned that he deflowered her daughter. Additionally, a stack of love letters written between Mabel Normand and Taylor disappeared during the course of the investigation. Taylor referred to Normand as Blessed Baby as a pet name for her whenever he wrote letters to her. The famous creator of the Keystone Cops and Hollywood director in his own right, Max Sennett, was questioned by the police and investigators, and even though they considered him a prime suspect, police later removed Sennett from consideration. When the investigators searched Taylor's clothing, they located a wallet holding $78, approximately $1,000 in today's currency, a silver cigarette case, a Waltham pocket watch, a penknife, and a locket bearing the photo of Mabel Normand. The investigators also found a 2-carat diamond ring on his finger. Because of the valuables still present, authorities immediately ruled out robbery as a motive. However, a large amount of cash that Taylor kept in the bungalow was missing and had never been accounted for up until the present day. When the authorities continued to interview Mary Miles Minter, she stated that another director-actor friend of Taylor stated to her that Taylor made several delusional statements the weeks before his death and that Taylor may have been going insane. At this point, all of the Hollywood studios expressed concern and downright anger that if the facts surrounding Taylor's death ever became public, people would lose their jobs. Sexual proclivities would be exposed, and more importantly, stockholders would lose millions of dollars. What knowledge could one man possibly have that could have caused so much destruction? Because of the great interest in the case across the country, authorities had more than enough suspects in the murder of William Desmond Taylor. Edward F. Sands, mentioned earlier in this presentation, held a criminal record where he stood convicted of embezzlement, forgery, and serial desertion from the U.S. military. Sands worked as Taylor's valet, cook, and general all-around handyman. Sands frequently stole from Taylor while in the director's employ, including forging some checks in the director's name. After Taylor fired the former convict, Sands went back to Taylor's bungalow and robbed him again, leaving footprints on Taylor's bed when he left the residence. Sands disappeared from history, and some historians claimed that his body was found in the Sacramento River in the early 1930s. Henry Peavy surfaced as another suspect who also had a criminal record. Peavy had been arrested 3 days before Taylor's murder for vagrancy and lewd and dissolute behavior. Peavy took over after Taylor fired Sands and was the person who discovered Taylor's body on the morning after the murder. Taylor was slated to appear on Peavy's behalf in court on February 2, 1922, but unfortunately, someone murdered him. Authorities questioned Peavy extensively, but noted he provided no evidence whatsoever to the murder itself. Some reporters believed that Peavy knew more than he stated to police and reporters, and they decided to kidnap him in order to exact a confession. The ploy did not work. Peavy left Los Angeles for San Francisco a few months after the murder. In 1930, Peavy was confined to the Napa State Hospital with an advanced case of general paresis, venereal disease related to dementia, from a case of advanced syphilis. Henry Peavy died of advanced tertiary syphilis in December of 1931. One of the more obvious suspects, Mabel Normand, began a relationship with Taylor when Normand believed that Taylor could help her with her cocaine addiction. Whenever Normand experienced frequent relapses, it appeared that Taylor would become despondent over her struggle. One of the motives that investigators suspected may have strongly been the reason for Taylor's death is that he may have met with federal investigators to give them information on Normand's cocaine suppliers. Normand's dealers may have learned of the meeting and ended Taylor's life due to his willingness to end their business. Taylor must have suspected that he placed his life in danger for wanting to end Normand's suffering, as well as ending some of the drug trade in 1920s Hollywood. Normand may also have suspected who may have been the killers, but kept quiet. On the night of the murder, Normand left Taylor's residence at approximately 7:45 p.m. in what has been described as a happy mood. When she left Taylor's residence, she carried a book in her hand, and little did she know that would be the last person to see Taylor alive. After a long and arduous interrogation, investigators no longer considered Normand to be a viable suspect. During Taylor's funeral, Normand wept openly. Her life continued as Normand made more films in Hollywood throughout the 1920s, but she died of tuberculosis on February 23, 1930. On her deathbed, Normand asked a friend, "Do you ever think they'll find out who killed Bill Taylor?" One of Taylor's neighbors, Faith Cole McLean, lived in the same building as Taylor along with her husband, actor Douglas McLean. Authorities believe that Mrs. McLean saw Taylor's killer and could identify him, or her. At approximately 8 p.m. on February 1, 1922, McLean stated that she and her husband were startled by a noise, and when she went to investigate, she opened the front door of their bungalow and spotted a man dressed like my idea of a motion picture burglar. Mrs. McLean stated that the person walked out of Taylor's bungalow and then immediately turned around and headed back into the bungalow as stated previously, as if he forgot something when leaving Taylor's residence. When she finally got to see what the mystery person looked like, she said it appeared as though the person was wearing makeup and walked effeminately, as if the person was not a man at all. Police also expressed interest in a studio executive named Charles Eiton, general manager of Paramount Studios. Eiton and several representatives of the studio entered the Taylor bungalow after the murder and removed items that proved compromising to both Taylor and the studio. Eiton accomplished this either before the police arrived or immediately after they entered the bungalow with police permission. As mentioned previously, authorities considered Mary Miles Minter a suspect, but after a lengthy interrogation, removed her from the suspect list. Love letters from Minter to Taylor had been discovered in the bungalow and demonstrated that the young girl, 19 years old at the time of the alleged affair, was smitten with Taylor. Newspaper reporters alleged that a sexual relationship existed between the director and Mary Miles Minter, but this has been historically discounted as merely a teenager's crush of unrequited love. Because of the publishing of the letters in the newspapers, it shattered Minter's wholesome image and, more or less, portrayed her as a vamp. After Taylor's death, Minter only did 4 more films for Paramount, and the studio never offered her another contract. Other studios wanted her to act in their movies, but being that Minter was never comfortable as an actress, she married a millionaire in 1957 and lived in the lap of luxury until her death in 1984. Police next focused on Charlotte Shelby, Minter's mother, who was a former Broadway actress and what can be described as a typical stage mother. At the age of 5, her daughter, Mary Miles Minter, accompanied older sister Margaret on an audition, only because no babysitter was available, and was noticed by the director and given her first part. After this, she was frequently employed, widely noted for both her talent and visual appeal. In 1912, to avoid child labor laws in Chicago while her 10-year-old daughter was appearing in a play, Shelby obtained the birth certificate of a cousin and changed Juliet's name to Mary Miles Minter. She made her first feature film in 1915 at the age of 13, after which her career steadily grew. At the time of the Taylor murder, Shelby became evasive and appeared, at least in the opinion of authorities, to be untruthful with a lot of things. Authorities seemed more interested in Shelby due to the fact that she did have a motive, and they later discovered that she owned a .38 caliber revolver that required unusual rounds. This was the same type of weapon that killed Taylor that she allegedly threw into a Louisiana bayou. It has been assumed that Shelby not only worried about how Taylor may have influenced her daughter, but Shelby may have had designs on Taylor herself. Shelby traveled outside the United States in an effort to avoid any inquiries as to her involvement or press coverage with the Taylor murder. In 1936, in an argument with her other daughter, actress Margaret Shelby, the daughter accused Charlotte Shelby of the murder during a violent argument that the two had at the time. Because of Shelby's social relationships with the District Attorney's Office of Los Angeles, although strongly suspected of being the murderer, the DA's office declined to pursue the matter against Shelby. 20 years after the murder, LA County District Attorney Buren Fitts stated that not enough evidence existed to bring Charlotte Shelby to trial. Fitts advocated preserving the evidence accumulated for the case until such time when there may be a break in the case. Unfortunately, the evidence has since disappeared. Charlotte Shelby died in 1957, and in 1973, Fitts committed suicide. Margaret Gibson was a film actress that met Taylor when she first came to Hollywood. In 1917, the young actress was indicted for prostitution and opium distribution. Gibson later changed her name to Patricia Palmer. At the time of Taylor's murder, Palmer was 27 years old and soon got work in a number of films produced by the famous players Lasky. In 1923, police arrested and jailed her on extortion charges. The charges were later dropped. In 1934, in her own words, Palmer fled the country to the Far East and married an oil executive. Her husband, Elber Lewis, died as a result of an attack on the oil refinery at Penang in Malaysia during World War II. Lewis left Palmer with a small pension that she lived on until her death in 1964. It was right before her death that she confessed to the murder of Taylor. Palmer had recently converted to Catholicism in front of a priest, although no evidence existed that she ever had anything to do with the murder. Although evidence should have been sequestered, most of the documents and evidence as of this presentation are missing. As a result of the Taylor case, several others that occurred during the 1920s, including Fatty Arbuckle, studios began putting morality or moral turpitude clauses within actors' and directors' contracts. This meant that anything regarding the lack of an individual's moral compass could spell cancellation of the contract, putting the actor or director out of work. The Taylor case also shone the light on the darker side of Hollywood, a side that continued to rear its ugly head throughout history. The death of William Desmond Taylor played out in the press with several aspects that continue to generate interest in the case. Once someone claims that a sexual component may have been the reason for such haphazard handling of the case, then one understands why the case continues to haunt those who seek the truth. The death of William Desmond Taylor remains a mystery to this day.
On November 16, 1924, an extravagant yacht known as the Oneida made her way from Los Angeles to San Diego. This vessel was owned by William Randolph Hearst, the New York newspaper mogul who used his yacht for a special birthday party. This special party was for Thomas Ince, a Hollywood innovator who began Paramount Studios, and most of his changes in how studios are run are still used today. Hearst contemplated buying Paramount Studios and taking control of the entity, and Ince would be his advisor. On this particular Sunday night, all that would change. The guest list was very distinguished for this party, but it was not just any party. Thomas Ince was celebrating his birthday. Charlie Chaplin, Marion Davies, Eleanor Glynn, and later gossip columnist Luella Parsons, and Eleanora Ince, Thomas's wife, among other financial and celebrity influencers who attended the party. Hearst never drank alcohol and was a teetotaler, and everyone knew not to drink in his presence. The Hollywood crowd that inhabited the boat were used to drinking and snuck their own hooch into the party. At some point in the evening, Ince complained that he was not feeling well. A physician on the yacht at that time, Dr. Daniel Goodwin, stated that Ince began to feel ill after dinner and immediately tried to get Ince to a hospital on dry land to test his malady. Once the boat docked, Dr. Goodwin accompanied Ince to a local hospital, then to Ince's home, where he passed away of heart failure on November 19, 1924. Dr. Goodwin signed an incomplete death certificate, and Ince's body was cremated. Both of these actions were against California law. Ince's cause of death, as being a heart attack, was the official story related to the media of the day. But the next day, a newspaper headline in Los Angeles appeared to state, "Movie producer shot on Hearst's yacht." Although the coroner's report had not been issued, Ince's body had quickly been cremated. The story told through newspapers and then perpetuated by some of the guests on the Oneida held a scandalous component. The famous guests on the yacht that weekend served to protect themselves, and certainly Hearst could never be suspected in anything so scandalous. Charlie Chaplin allegedly telegrammed his longtime valet, Toriachi Kono, to meet him at the quay in San Diego. Kono claimed that he witnessed Ince being removed from the yacht and moved into an ambulance. As Kono witnessed Ince being placed into the ambulance, he noticed that Ince's clothes were wet and there was a visible bullet hole in his head. The morning headline read, "Producer shot on Hearst's yacht." After the initial headline was released, no trace of the paper and no one saw the headline again. Most of the guests even stated that they had other plans that weekend and averred that they had not even been near the docks. Authorities never questioned the guests, even though the district attorney's office opened an investigation into the incident. The DA for San Diego, Chester C. Kempley, stated that he was satisfied with the explanation of Ince's death by heart attack. Therefore, DA Kempley refrained from conducting any serious investigation. If the accepted story was that Ince died from a heart attack, where did the cover story come from that Ince sustained a gunshot wound to the head? Marion Davies, the mistress of William Randolph Hearst, appeared to be flirting with none other than Charles Chaplin. Chaplin had a reputation for such lascivious behavior through the years he spent making movies in Hollywood. The incident that is most widely accepted is that Hearst always exhibited behavior of that of a very possessive and jealous man. He believed that Charlie Chaplin had designs on Davies and, in fact, made his move on the actress that night. In a confrontation with Chaplin, Hearst pulled a revolver and fired at Chaplin, missing him and instead fatally wounding Ince. Hearst held no animosity toward Ince, but the scandal had to be quelled before the truth became known. Is this what truly transpired? Only the people that were there that night know the truth, and all of them have since passed on. The death of Thomas Ince became one of those Hollywood legends that defined the disposability of human lives for the sake of the almighty dollar.
At the Plaza Hotel in San Francisco in early September 1932, a young woman checked out of the hotel after living there for approximately 6 months. She stopped at the front desk and paid off her bill. Earlier that day, the young lady booked a stateroom on the Delta King riverboat. The young woman went to the dock, got on the boat, where several witnesses saw her standing on the deck of the ship, crying. A waiter remembered her at dinner, where she rarely ate a thing. 2 hours later, a security guard found a woman's coat and shoes on the very spot where the woman had been standing on the deck. On the following morning, when the Delta King docked, people noticed that the young woman did not leave the ship. Immediately, the crew and staff began looking for the woman who seemed so despondent the night before. At the same time, in Beverly Hills, California, Jean Harlow, platinum blonde star of the 1920s and 1930s, received police officers at her residence after some of the household staff discovered her husband, Paul Byrne, an MGM studio executive, dead in the bathroom of their marital home with a bullet through his skull. When investigators started probing into Byrne's backstory, they noticed that things aren't always what they seem. In fact, they discovered that Byrne had married a young woman by the name of Dorothy Millette, the young woman later to be discovered that lived at the San Francisco Plaza Hotel and then disappeared from the deck of the Delta King. In her early 20s, Jean Harlow became one of the biggest movie stars in the world. The movie Hell's Angel, a production from billionaire Howard Hughes, launched Harlow to stardom with her curvy figure and platinum blonde hair. When her star rose, Harlow met Byrne, who was from Germany, who convinced MGM to sign the young star. It appeared from his connections that his friendship or courtship could further the rising star's career. In fact, Byrne believed that Harlow could make a career as a serious actress rather than just pretty face on the screen. In July of 1932, after a brief courtship, Byrne and Harlow married. The couple had only been married for 2 months when the maid found her husband's dead body in the couple's bathroom. As in the Taylor murder, the first call went to the studio instead of the Los Angeles Police Department. Once the studio executives went to the Byrne-Harlow residence, they spent 2 hours combing through the residence to sanitize any evidence that may be discovered. The MGM fixers spent the rest of the day developing what their spin would be to the media in order to protect Harlow. What the studio did not count on was the dogged determination of the investigators on the case. When they contacted Byrne's insurance agent, a man named George C. Clarkin, they learned that Byrne never divorced his first wife, Dorothy Millette. Byrne kept the marriage a secret and never mentioned her to anyone. Clarkin believed that Miss Byrne had died in a sanitarium. Police discovered that Byrne met Millette when both worked as actors in Toronto, Canada. Their courtship was also whirlwind, and they married a short time later in New York City, where Byrne pursued a career in stage management. Just then, Millette became very ill and had to move to a sanitarium. Byrne then moved to California, and it was never clear whether both of them agreed to this move. Even though Byrne began the rise at MGM as an executive, he continued to support his wife back in New York. He sent her a monthly stipend of approximately $350, $5,000 in today's dollars, and Millette stayed at the Algonquin Hotel. Byrne continued to support her even up until the time that he and Harlow got married. Several letters were found in her baggage on the Delta King that Byrne signed, "My love and best wishes always." On September 14, 1932, 2 fishermen discovered a body in the Sacramento River. The body was that of a young woman later identified as Dorothy Millette. A week prior to the discovery of her floating body, the newspapers began to refer to her as the Ghost Wife. Rumors spread that witnesses claimed to have seen a woman with Byrne the day before he committed suicide. Some theorized that Millette met with Byrne, murdered him for one reason or another, perhaps that he committed bigamy, then went on the run to San Francisco. As Millette's mystery life became public, the coroner in Los Angeles questioned friends and colleagues and learned that Byrne talked of suicide for a long time. Depression played a big part in Byrne's adult life. The publicity generated through Byrne's marriage to Harlow created a lot of tension in his life as well. The fixers who appeared at the marital residence before the police hinted that Byrne may have been unfitted for marriage, so to speak, and that he may have been unworthy of marriage to such a siren as Harlow. At the coroner's inquest, Burns' personal physician knew what may have been the cause of the patient's despondency. Dr. Howard P. Jones stated that with respect to his patient, he would not disclose Burns' condition. Innuendos surfaced that Burns suffered from some form of erectile dysfunction, and Harlow teased him about it. After confirming Millette's identity, authorities investigated her further and learned that she knew that Burns changed his will to make Harlow his sole beneficiary in the untimely event of his death. This made Millette a pauper almost overnight and would, in fact, provide a motive for her to murder her estranged husband. However, there has never been any substantial evidence that she did so. The timeline of events made it impossible for Millette to have murdered Burns in the wee hours of the morning and then returned to her hotel in San Francisco, where someone witnessed her walking in the lobby by noon of that day. So who may have been responsible for the murder? Did Jean Harlow murder her husband over some failure in the bedroom? To this day, there has never actually been a satisfactory explanation as to the cause or causes of Burns' death. Harlow went on to marry a year later, her third, that ended in divorce only after 12 months. In 1937, at the age of 26, Harlow collapsed on the set of the movie Saratoga. Doctors at the studio believed Harlow was merely suffering from the flu, but then her symptoms became more virulent. Loss of vision, bloating, and gray skin. When a second doctor was summoned to the studio, he realized that Harlow needed to be hospitalized immediately due to kidney failure. Less than 6 days after the diagnosis, Harlow slipped into a coma and passed away. MGM closed for the day of her funeral. Harlow was not interred next to her husband Paul Burns. Dorothy Millette lies buried at East Lawn Memorial Park in Walnut Grove with her headstone reading, Dorothy Millette Burns.
On the morning of June 16, 1959, the once talented Hollywood star, adored by fans all over the world, lay naked in his bedroom, dead from a single gunshot wound to the side of the head. The people that attended a get-together the night before in the downstairs living room stated they were too drunk to remember hearing anything, much less the gunshot that ended the idol's life. His then-girlfriend sat downstairs with two friends as her paramour allegedly decided to end his life. When authorities arrived to perform a cursory investigation of the crime, they found the victim lying naked in a pool of blood, a weapon between his feet, a shell casing underneath the body, a bullet in his brain, and a thick spray of his gore stretching up to the wall to the slanted ceiling. Investigators immediately deduced that though the star's death was tragic, it appeared that he committed suicide. Some considered that conclusion to be somewhat premature. Several factors contributed to the doubts exhibited as to the particulars of the death of Superman, George Reeves. George Reeves was born George Kiefer Brewer on January 5, 1914, in Woolstock, Iowa, a small farming community approximately 83 miles north of Des Moines. As an only child, George's father, Don Brewer, divorced his mother not too long after his birth. Soon thereafter, George's mother, Helen Brewer, moved her and her infant son to Pasadena, California. Being there only a short time, Helen met one Frank Basolo, and subsequently the two were married. Frank then adopted young George, and the young boy became known as George Basolo. After he graduated from high school, young George enrolled at Pasadena Junior College, where he pursued music and acting. George also joined the choir, playing the guitar and performing in different college productions. At the age of 21, in 1935, George joined a very popular and prestigious theater, the Pasadena Community Playhouse, where he appeared in various productions over the next 4 years. In 1939, casting agents for the famous Hollywood producer David O. Selznick were looking for young talent to star in his epic production of Gone with the Wind. The agents approached Reeves to read for a small part, and he was cast under a different name, Brent Tarleton. Because Reeves did so well in such a small part, Warner Brothers awarded the young, handsome actor with a contract. After this break, Brent Tarleton became George Reeves. After signing the contract, Reeves appeared in some minor roles until 1943, when Warner Brothers cast him as a wounded World War II soldier who fell in love with his co-star Claudette Colbert in the movie So Proudly We Hail. With the U.S. now embroiled in World War II since 1941, Reeves decided to join the Army and play his patriotic part. As an actor, Reeves was assigned to a special theatrical unit of the U.S. Army Air Corps, where his superiors assigned him to training films for the armed services, including the dangers of venereal disease. When he was stationed in New York, Reeves was asked to play a bit role in a play entitled Winged Victory. When the show concluded, Reeves traveled with the touring company of the play. When the war ended and Reeves received his discharge, beginning in 1946, he starred in what some have called embarrassments for an actor. Later known as B-movies, Reeves took forgettable roles in movies entitled Jungle Goddess and Thunder in the Pines. But the role that he would become known for, and later some say typecasted, occurred in 1951. At that time, the country experienced a recession, and Reeves was reduced to just walk-on parts. Even the big-name stars with the studios received pink slips. Then, Reeves met the wife of a studio executive that would not only help his career, but spell doom for the actor. Her name, Toni Mannix, and her husband, Eddie Mannix, MGM Vice President. In that year, and with the influence of Toni Mannix, Reeves reluctantly accepted the leading role in the television series The Adventures of Superman. Toni Mannix was 8 years Reeves' senior and started in show business as a Ziegfeld Follies girl. Prior to marrying Eddie Mannix, she fit the role of his mistress for a year. When Toni married her husband, she met Reeves when the marriage seemed to be on the rocks. Eddie Mannix did not seem very worried about whether his wife had an affair with Reeves or not. Certainly, the casting couch did provide a great deal of opportunity for Eddie Mannix as a powerful Hollywood mogul. Strangely, Eddie Mannix would double date with his mistress along with Reeves and Toni Mannix. Word about town was that Reeves was a kept man, receiving gifts from his lover such as a car, a pocket watch, clothes, furniture, and even a house. But the two engaged in the relationship with the understanding that when Eddie Mannix died, Reeves and Toni would be married. When it came to the adventures of Superman, at first, audiences, especially the young children that flocked to their newfangled television sets in the early evening to watch their superhero, Reeves' show brought high ratings and critical acclaim. Reeves played both Clark Kent and Superman and became a household name in the United States and around the world. One would think that if your star rises rather quickly, that one would be appreciative for the breaks. But by all accounts, Reeves became disillusioned as to the course his career was taking. But given a chance to change his image from a TV star into a bona fide movie star, failed, as Reeves was cast in the Academy Award-winning film From Here to Eternity. What he thought would propel him into movie superstardom, Reeves did not appear for very long in the film, and this would turn out to be his last movie role. When patrons went to the theater, they would just yell out, "Hey, it's Superman!" When Reeves accepted the role of Superman in 1951, the series would not appear for another 2 years until 1953. The series became so popular that Reeves appeared at department stores and other publicity events in costume. Moreover, when on hiatus, The actors could not devote enough time to other projects where they could expand their acting influence. The Superman series paid Reeves $2,500 per week, an astronomical wage for those days, but the filming extended to 52 weeks a year. Reeves seemed to be going into that direction and feared playing the Man of Steel would be a detriment to his career. He was correct. Over the course of the series, Reeves suffered from what some horror stars like Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi struggled with for their entire careers: typecasting where they could not develop any other talents that they may have. After every season when the show filming ended, Reeves burned his Superman costume. When the show ended in 1959, after 5 seasons as Superman, the show was canceled. Reeves then left his fiancée, Toni Mannix, and began a serious relationship with Lenore Lemon, a local brunt of gossip columns across the country. This incident struck Toni Mannix hard as she considered Reeves to be her shining prize. Toni Mannix seemed to retreat into her home and telephone Reeves at least 20 times a day. Because of this behavior, friends worried about Mannix's health and gave birth to one theory as to Reeves's death. Eddie Mannix had been in ill health for quite some time, and before becoming a studio executive during the golden age of Hollywood, he grew up with gangsters, the likes of Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, along with Irish and Jewish gangsters as well, when Eddie lived in New Jersey. Eddie Mannix also had connections with mobsters in Los Angeles, as well as the chief of police. As far as his wife was concerned, although Eddie Mannix sustained a large amount of affairs, when it came to his wife, he was very protective. Additionally, Mannix's first wife died mysteriously in a car accident in 1937, with some claiming that she was uncooperative when it came to Mannix's unofficial title of being the fixer for MGM. Unofficially, Mannix quelled rumors about reckless affairs, drunk driving arrests, wife beatings, drug arrests, and union disagreements. It became readily apparent to anyone who knew the executive that when a problem arose, such as the nature of those previously mentioned, Mannix certainly knew the right muscle to contact. On the night of June 15, 1959, Reeves and Lemon sat at the residence located at 1579 Benedict Canyon Drive. The two lovers were joined by writer Robert Condon, who had been staying with the couple. At approximately 1 a.m., Reeves was in bed when more guests arrived at the house. Drinking permeated most of the evening, and the group that gathered in the living room became very loud, forcing Reeves to trek downstairs to yell at the guests to keep the noise down. Reeves then apologized and went back upstairs to his bedroom. Allegedly, Lemon commented that he's going upstairs to shoot himself. Lemon explained her comment to the other guests when she also said, "See, he's opening the drawer to get to the gun." Suddenly, all of the guests heard what sounded like a gunshot. Lemon confirmed the morbid activity when she finally told her guests, "I told you, he shot himself." By this time, the guests, including Lemon and Condon, were very drunk. According to the police reports, Reeves allegedly shot himself at approximately 1:59 a.m. The guests failed to call the police for over 45 minutes following the sound of the gunshot. After the police were called and they arrived a short time later and noticed that the witnesses' reflections were not that clear. When investigators walked into Reeves' bedroom, they noted him laying naked in a pool of blood, a Luger between his legs, and a shell casing underneath his corpse. Although the coroner's assessment concluded suicide, questions remained with the actor's friends and colleagues as to whether he actually committed suicide, or was there something more sinister afoot. Several things occurred during the investigation that caused doubt as to the official story of Reeves's death. Firstly, when investigators further viewed the crime scene, they noticed 4 bullet holes in the floor of his bedroom. Secondly, the coroner noted that Reeves sustained bruising all over his body. And finally, shell casings were located all over the bedroom in some very strange places. When looking at Reeves's death, investigators, friends, and colleagues alike believed his death was no accident. Theories abounded as to who may have been responsible. It is almost certainly feasible that his ex-lover, Toni Mannix, had more than motive to execute Reeves. After all, her husband did have connections to the underworld that held no compunction to killing someone for money. On the night before the incident, Reeves and Lemon went out to dinner and drank heavily, while leaving Condon at the house around 11 p.m. Reeves went to bed alone around midnight and did not return to the living room until he complained about the noise made by the neighbors and Lemon at approximately 1 a.m. in the morning on the 16th. The list of neighbors included Carol von Ronkel, Condon's married girlfriend, and William Bliss, member of the community, but unknown to the rest of the people there. After Reeves complained, he then apologized to the rest of the room and returned to his bedroom upstairs. When police confronted Lemon as to what she stated to the others prior to hearing the shot, she stated she was just drunk. William Bliss was the first one to run upstairs and discover Reeves's body. After Reeves's death, his mother firmly believed that her son was murdered. She based this on the fact that after the police sealed the house as a crime scene, Lemon went back to the scene, broke the tape, and left for New York with over $4,000 in traveler's checks. She never returned to Los Angeles. Although the mystery remains as to whether George Reeves's death was suicide or murder still raises speculation. As she lay on her deathbed, Toni Mannix allegedly confessed to her priest that she had Reeves murdered. Her confession never stipulated how Reeves could have been murdered with a house full of witnesses. Lenore Lemon had frequently been suspected of murdering Reeves after she gave her statement to the police with several holes for researchers to investigate. She claimed that the neighbors got to the house that night and she and Reeves were involved in one of their massive fights. Lemon claimed she fired a shot from the weapon used in Reeves's death into one of the living room walls. 30 years later, Lemon admitted to an interviewer that William Bliss made up her statements to make the story more interesting, but she never claimed ownership of the morbid predictions prior to Reeves's death. As far as Lemon protruding as a suspect throughout this mystery, if Reeves's death was ever considered a homicide, the evidence is scant. Can we take at face value that perhaps the normal human emotions that face aging actors overcame Reeves to the point where he killed himself? Utilizing common sense and some investigative techniques, although there are several factors here that demand more investigation. Unless there is a statement or confession that one can deem authentic, the death of Superman will remain a mystery. In examining the cases we presented, one theme runs through them all: money talks. William Desmond Taylor's crime scene had been decimated before any investigator set foot into the bungalow where he lived. What seemed more important to the powers that be was to protect an investment, and if that meant to keep evidence from any prying eyes as to the identity of the culprit or culprits, it saved them a load of embarrassment. William Randolph Hearst, the tycoon who made more money than anyone in the 20th century, may have exhibited murderous jealousy that cost the life of an innocent man. Again, the truth remains hidden and will probably remain that way, although that seems the only plausible explanation of Thomas Ince's untimely death. In the case of Paul Byrne, it seemed that he wanted to be someone he could never really achieve. Having married one of the most sensual, sexiest stars in Hollywood at the time, Jean Harlow certainly achieved what she wanted by betting an executive such as Byrne. After all, Byrne was the convincing factor that begged MGM to sign Harlow. Thereafter, she became one of the larger-than-life icons in Hollywood. Byrne will forever be known as a bigamist who betrayed his first wife with the sole motive of building his career and gaining bragging rights. If his sexual dysfunction had anything to do with his death, assuredly, it still stands as one of the most enduring yet embarrassing legends of Hollywood. As for George Reeves, it is undeniable that the Superman role certainly typecasted the actor from that point forward. Understanding the seriousness with which Reeves considered his career, his despondency over that label could cause someone, anyone, to commit suicide. All of the factors surrounding Reeves's death make for a great Hollywood murder mystery. In fact, in 2006, the movie Hollywoodland took a lot of literary license in producing what happened during that tragic event. But unless there is further evidence that may emerge, one must accept this, also as a Hollywood legend. Thank you for joining us for this episode of True Crime, Man's Dark Imagination. Until next time. Hello everyone, this is Alan Gotro, your host of True Crime, Man's Dark Imagination. If you would like to support our channel, you can become a member of Subscribestar. There are different levels, and subscribers get special privileges. Also, we do have a PayPal account. If you enjoy our work here, please think about subscribing. I will leave the links below in the comments section. We thank you very much for your viewing, and please stay tuned for future programs.